So let's talk about a moment that really changed everything. 2001. That's when China joined the World Trade Organization. Now, everyone knew this was going to be a big deal, that it would reshape the global economy. And boy, did it deliver on that promise. But in ways that almost nobody saw coming. We're going to break down the story of the deal that, truly changed the world.
Yeah, and look, this wasn't just some boring agreement about tariffs or trade quotas. It was so much more than that. The source material calls it one of the hinge moments of the modern world. Think about that. You're talking about formally plugging a country with over 1 billion people and a really long strategic memory right into the very heart of the global trading system. It's a massive, massive event.
So that really brings us to the big question, right? For years and years, everybody celebrated this as the high point of globalization. It was the ultimate win-win. But looking back now with hindsight, was it really a moment of integration, or was it actually the beginning of something else? The moment that laid the groundwork for all the rivalry and fragmentation we're seeing today.
Okay, so to really get what happened here, you have to think of it as a bargain, a huge, grand bargain. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. It's like the two sides, the West and China, signed the same piece of paper, but then walked away from the table with completely different ideas about what the deal was actually for.
And this right here, this really captures that disconnect perfectly. On one side, you had the Western wager, and it was based on this core belief, this assumption, hey, if we help China get rich and integrate it into our system, they'll eventually become more like us, politically. But for China, the strategy was completely different. Integration was never the goal, it was a tool. A really, really powerful tool.
Yeah, exactly. This quote just nails it. The goal wasn't to become Western, the goal was to become strong. China's leaders looked at this deal and saw a golden opportunity, a way to get access to global markets and technology, sure, but not to change their political system. It was to supercharge their own modernization, make the state stronger, and, well, improve its position in the world. So at the end of the day, both sides saw a win for themselves. That's why the deal got done. But they were basically on two different trains, running on parallel tracks, heading to completely different destinations. And that fundamental mismatch, that's what would end up defining the next 20 years of globalization.
And you know what? For a long, long time, it looked like this bargain was an unbelievable, spectacular success for everyone. In the years right after 2001, China's economy just exploded onto the world stage. It created a manufacturing revolution on a scale the world had literally never seen before. I mean, the speed of it all was just breathtaking. After 2001, you had all these huge global companies just racing to rewire their entire supply chains around China. It wasn't like China was just another factory on the block. Nope. It became the organizing center for pretty much all of global manufacturing. And it happened incredibly fast. And the good news seemed to be everywhere, right? If you were a consumer in the West, stuff got cheaper. If you were a multinational corporation, your profits went through the roof. The whole global economy was seen as more efficient. And incredibly, hundreds of millions of people in China were lifted out of poverty. I mean, from that perspective, this looks like one of the greatest economic success stories of all time. But, there's a but coming. Beneath that really shiny surface, some deep, deep cracks were starting to form. The problem was, the overall gains of globalization were hiding some very real, very concentrated losses. And those losses were politically explosive. And for way too long, a lot of people just chose to ignore them. In fact, this phenomenon even got a name. Economists call it the China shock. And what it means is that intense, rapid, and really focused economic disruption that hit industrial regions in the West. These were communities that they couldn't compete with the sheer scale and speed of China's rise. Now, you have to understand the two different perspectives here. If you were, say, a policymaker in a capital city or an economist at a university, you're looking at things from 30,000 feet. You see the big picture data. And that data looked great. It showed aggregate gains, cheaper goods, higher corporate profits. The national growth statistics were strong. The logic of the whole thing seemed undeniable. But the view from the ground, in places like the American Midwest or parts of Europe, that told a completely different story. It was a story of factories shutting down, good-paying industrial jobs vanishing, and entire communities feeling like they'd been hollowed out. A whole way of life was just disappearing. The gains were spread thin across millions of consumers, but the losses were deep, painful, and hit specific places really, really hard.
And this gap, this is so crucial to understanding everything that came next. This massive disconnect between the 30,000-foot view and the on-the-ground reality, it created this deep well of resentment. And that resentment, that's what fueled the huge political backlash against globalization that would just explode a few years down the road. Okay, so this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the ultimate and maybe the most profound outcome of this whole thing. Because this story isn't just about economic winners and losers. This bargain, it ended up changing the entire structure of the global system itself, forever. And this quote right here, it just gets right to the very heart of the flawed thinking at the beginning. The core Western wager was this: our global order is so strong, so powerful, that when we bring China in, we will change them. The system will absorb and reshape China. What they didn't fully consider was the flip side, that a country as massive and strategically savvy as China could actually reshape the system itself. So let's just walk through how that bet was lost. Step 1 was the assumption. The global system changes China. Simple enough. But step 2 was the reality. China didn't just join the system. It used the system's own rules, its openness, to build up its own national power. And that led to step 3, the outcome. China's incredible scale and its smart strategy ended up changing the global system itself. And that's really the stark, unavoidable truth of the last 20-plus years. The very process of integration, the thing that was supposed to make China more like a partner, well, it ended up being the very thing that built the material foundations, the factories, the tech, the money, for a future strategic rival. So in the end, China's entry into the WTO was this massive turning point, but it was kind of concealed inside what looked like a huge success. What seemed like the absolute peak triumph of globalization was, at the very same time, planting the seeds for its biggest challenges. The high point of one era and the start of a new, more competitive one, they weren't two different stories. They were two sides of the very same coin. And that leaves us with this incredible paradox, doesn't it? China joining the WTO made our world more integrated, more interconnected than it has ever been. But at the same time, it created new dependencies, sparked new rivalries, and introduced a deep instability that, let's be honest, we are all living with right now. The world was becoming more integrated and a whole lot less settled.